Hi, my name is Nina Loop, and today I will be interviewing Ms. Chuong Khuat on Saturday, March 5th, 2011, at Saigon Houston Radio for Vietnamese American Heritage Foundation's 500 Oral Histories Project. Okay, so today we're going to get started with a few short, simple questions. What year were you born and where were you born?
I was born in 1963 and I was born in Vietnam, Saigon.
What was your childhood like?
Before 1975, it was pretty good. Both of my parents worked, and my dad, he had a pretty good job. He was a lawyer, and he worked for the government. Our life was pretty easy, I guess. We didn't have a lot of things like, we weren't rich or anything like that, but we did, we have people that help out in the family. We have 3 people that was actually working for our family. We went on vacation throughout the years. So our life was very easy. We had a lot of fun. We had a big family with 6 brothers and sisters, and we do have my parents have a lot of friends, so we do hang around on vacation times, and we have a lot of cousins that we play with too.
What kind of things would you do for fun when you were a child?
We usually play with the neighbors a lot. Like after school, you would just go out and play with them, kickball, all kind of things. Jumping ropes and singing and dancing and making plays. So all kind of things, all kind of stuff that we can think of at the time.
What kind of experiences did you have growing up and going through education in your early years in Vietnam?
With my parents, my mom's background, she was a teacher, so education was very important for our family. So we were doing really, really well. Even in elementary, after school, we have to go to tutor, and I was doing really well in school. My dream was, become a lawyer, just like my dad. And our plan was, when I graduated high school, he's going to send me to America to study. So that was like a really, really big plan for me and my sister, and my brother, and I actually skipped a grade so I could do that.
What was your relationship with your siblings like?
Oh, just like normal people. We fight a lot. We have a really we are a really close-knit family. We do love one another a lot, and we fight a lot as well. To this day we still do. But it's just like a sibling rivalry, and it's just like normal in any family.
Was there one sibling that you had a particular relationship with that was close?
Yeah, my older sister. We are not that old. We are like 10 months apart, and we actually went to we were in the same class for like several years throughout high school, from 6th grade until 9th grade. We were in the same class because, like I said earlier, that I skipped 1 grade. So in 5th grade, we were the same, and I was really close to her at the time, and to this day, I'm still. She's probably the closest one in the family to me.
Were you just particularly close to her because of the lack of age difference, or was it because of her personality?
We're all very close in age, like all our sisters and brothers, except for the last one. We're about like a year apart, a year and a half. So it's not so much about the age. I think probably about the personality. She's I don't know, I think maybe because spending a lot of time with her in school, because before that like I said, we were going to school in the morning, but then in the afternoon we also have good tutor, and I went to the same place with her. So I spent a lot more time with her than the rest of my siblings. So I think that was the biggest reason why I was close to her. And I could talk to her more than my other sibling, because to me, I'm like an older one, so I can't really share much. But with my older sister, I can tell her almost everything. And when we were young, we shared the same bed too. So that's another reason.
With your mom and with your dad, what was your relationship with each of them like?
With my mom and dad, we had a close relationship. With my dad, I didn't talk. With him a lot when we were little, because he had to work a lot. But I don't know. I was very close with my mom when I was young. But my mom was a disciplined one in the family. My dad, it was just, he was very easygoing. He was more difficult in certain way, like there's certain way that you have to, the way how you behave, the way you talk, the way you eat, he's very particular in those areas. But otherwise, he's not. He's really easygoing, always take us out, buy us things. My mom, she's not a spoiled one, so it's differently. The relationship I have with my mom and my dad, they are close but in different way.
With your mom, what sorts of values and beliefs did she really instill in her children?
She was she both, I think both of them always taught her how to you have to work really hard at what you do. But with my mom, I think it's the moral value was more important to her. You have to, like I said, behave a certain way, talk a certain way. Same thing with my dad, but the thing is, my mom's the one who talked to us more often, and she tell us, this is what you're supposed to do. And she also, honestly, being too young at the time, I can't really say a whole lot because, by 1975, I was only 13 years old, and at that time, we had to go out and struggle and earn a living. There was not a whole lot of time a whole lot of sharing time that I had with my mom. My dad was always sent away. But as far as I can remember, she always taught us how to, you have to study hard, work really hard at what you do, and try to be your best. So that's all I can remember.
As far as April 30th, 1975, do you remember anything specific about it? And if so, what is it?
I remember that because, it was like a chaotic time for every family. And my dad, he was captured about like 2 months prior to the fall of Saigon by his own government, the one he was working for. I think he was had some conflict with the president at the time. He was working at what we would consider like a White House in Vietnam, for the government. The president was working there, and he was the advisor for the president advisor. So he worked closely with the president at the time, and they were having some conflict in belief the way how he ran the country, and he knew at the time that was the plan. I think he was don't quote me on this, but I think that it was he already knew, the president at the time, 1975, that he was planning to leave the country, and there was a lot of conflict. So the president put a whole bunch of them, that's including my dad, that was working under him. And no, they took them someplace. It wasn't a jail, but it's someplace they were held, and so it was the whole 2 months prior to the fall of Saigon. So he was only released a couple of days before the fall of Saigon. So I saw a lot of we already knew, we heard, we listened on the radio, we watched TV, so we had a kind of an idea of what's going on. We knew that thing was changing the time, then changing the government, and we knew that Saigon was going to be under the communists. And so it's as little as I can remember, I knew there was a big thing was going to change. But as far as the impact of that, no, I didn't.
What kinds of feelings did you have when when April 30th came around?
Worry a little about the uncertainty of the future, and then as a young child, 13-year-old at the time, you see all of commotion and everything. There's some excitement in there for some reason. We did feel, I remember seeing talking to my sisters, and we kept giggling a little bit, and I don't know, it was just a way to handle our stress or not, but like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of understanding about the war and everything, or the impact of the fall of Saigon at that point.
Did you ever come in contact with any American soldiers?
Yes, actually I did, because I believe across my house, I think there was I'm not sure if it's the American embassy, but I know there was a lot of Americans who was living across the street, and during the fall of Saigon, and I saw those people was packing up. I saw, people walking and running and everything. I did see some American, yes.
What was your impressions of them?
I never have really any personal contact with them, so I can't really say that I don't think that I really have any impression of them at the time, being too young.
What's your view or your opinion on the way the U.S. reacted towards the war in Vietnam and what they did to help or lack of help as far as that?
At the time, I was too young to understand. Now, I think I just felt like maybe things could have been handled better. The way that I think they abandoned us, I think that, I just felt like it was abandonment on the American part. But at the same time, I do understand they were under a lot of pressure. So many lives have been lost, and then the money they had to put in our country, and the people over here, the demonstration from the student, from the people. So I understand where they're coming from as well. And I don't know if I can put all the blame on American. I think that we, as a country, we are responsible for our country and our people. And I think our own government wasn't doing a good job at that. I think we depend too much on American.
What was your journey over to America like, or what was your living conditions or just lifestyle in the refugee camps like as well?
I fled the country not by boat, but by walking. What I meant by that was that we had to pay people, and they took us from Vietnam to Cambodia, and from Cambodia we have to walk through the jungle, walk through the woods, so we can get to Thailand. That was the final destination, because Cambodia at the time they didn't have any refugee camp, and I don't think they ever did. So the journey took me over 11 days, and it wasn't as easy as I thought. I was captured 3 times during my journey. I was separated from my group. We had a group of 12 people when we left. By the time we went to Cambodia, we had to go separate ways. Some of us had to go through the mountains. Some of us had to go through the woods. Some had to go through by boat through the rivers. And I had to go through the wood. So one of the people that we paid money to, he took me. But I think within about 4 hours into the wood, I was captured by the Khmer Rouge. They let him go because he was a Cambodian, and so they kept me overnight, and I escaped that night. And I ran. I don't know how long. It was. I was alone for about I think maybe more than a day. I know that I ran 2 that night. And after a while, I think I was so tired, and I found there was a hole under a really big tree. So I kind of climbed under that, and was afraid that they would be looking for me. So, and I fell asleep. And I think I think the next day, and I ran again, and I met a group of Cambodian. I think these are a group of people that they normally go to the border between Thailand and Cambodia. They were selling stuff, exchanging goods with the other side. So I kind of blend in with them, hoping that they would take me, because I knew that the refugee camps in Thailand. So I knew that was their journey. I've heard about that before, this trip. So I kind of blended in with them. And within a few hours, we met up with another group of Khmer Rouge, and they can pick me out from the group right away. I guess because compared with Cambodian, we have a lighter skin, and they can tell by the way you dress. I was wearing, their costume, sarong, but still they can tell the difference. So they came up to me and they speak in Cambodian. Of course, I didn't understand. I couldn't respond. So they captured me. They took me with them, and I was with them for about like another day. And I ran again. Like I said, I wait until the nightfall one day, because it was in the wood. They just there was no camp or anything like that. So we just lie on the ground and go to sleep, and they help me sleeping in between. But I got up and I wait until they fall asleep, and I ran again the second time. And this time I didn't run that long. Another overnight, the next day I was captured by another group of Khmer Rouge. And this time they held me for another, I believe it was for another 7 to 8 days in the camp. That was actually a refugee camp, was for the Cambodian, because I know that while I was there, a couple of the Vietnamese people who was arrested, who was captured before it was already in the camp, they came, one of the guys came over, and he did tell me that whatever happened, try to deal with it, accept that, this is a journey that you have to take. This is time to survive. It's not a time to fight. It's not a time to resist or anything like that. So I did what I have to do, to survive. But I was lucky because there was a lady, a Cambodian lady. She was in the camp. She actually was helping me a little bit, protecting me from the Khmer Rouge. She was hiding me, during the night, and she was, trying to cover me, put me under her bed, and for a few days. And then the last day, the Red Cross, they came, and one of the Vietnamese guy that I spoke to earlier, that was the first time I saw him, and I didn't see him or anybody after that. But I was told later on by another guy, and after I got to the camp, that guy, he came and spoke to the Red Cross and asked them to take me with them because of the situation. I was the only woman the only girl at the camp at the time, and they just felt that it was just too much for me to handle. So they pay the Khmer Rouge, not money, but I believe it was rice, and they took me with them that day. So they brought me to another camp. And at that camp, I met up with a lot of Vietnamese people. I think probably about a group, maybe more than 100 people. And some of the people that was in my group when I left Vietnam were there. And a few of them were arrested. A few of them never made it. And but I think about 8 of them I saw them over there. So that was the first place that I actually would consider as a refugee camp for me.
Can you describe your feelings or experiences in each of your captivities?
I've heard story about people who left, about both people, not people that who walk with both people. When you left, the things that happened to you, could be anything. And so in my mind, I kind of knew that thing, that the other thing could have happened to me. And in a way, I've learned to accept because I knew that I have to make it. I'm the first one in my family. My dad was in re-education camp. I have 5 older sisters and brother. I'm the second oldest. My older sister, she's very weak. She's physically and mentally she was very weak. She was, she has always been sheltered by my parents. So, and the rest of my brothers and sisters are younger than I am. So I knew that was my responsibility. I have to get out. I have to go so they can have a future because that's our goal is to get over here so I can sponsor my family. So no matter what, you have to deal with that. So that was my mentality. So, and at every capture, I mean, honestly, I was the survival instinct came over. I knew that I couldn't stay. I knew that had I stay, I mean, things would, would happen, and I would know what I would have done. So I had to get out. I had to escape, and I did. The first time, the second time, I wasn't surprised when I was captured again, and it's the same thing. I knew I had to run. The third time I couldn't because it was like an actual camp I was held at, and they have people who watch me all the time. But like I said, with the lady, and to this day, I thank God for her because it wasn't for her, I think it could have been a lot worse for me. She actually protected me from a lot of these guys. She covered up for me, and she hid me under her bed, and under even one of the big barrel that one time she even put me in there. Because the guy was looking for me, so she actually did that for me, and I never, I didn't speak, the language, and she didn't understand me, but I can tell that she felt really bad for me, and she was protecting me, and I never had a chance to thank her, even when I left, because I think when the Red Cross came over and took me away, it was like a last decision, and there was nothing. So I never really got a chance to go back and hug her or say goodbye or anything like that. But to this day, I could never remember. I mean, I could never forget her face or what she did for me.
Was the rest of your family in Saigon, Vietnam, while you were traversing through the forest, and what were they doing if they were there?
The rest of my family was still back in Vietnam. I don't know, honestly. I can't really say. I think everybody's different. When you deal with diversity, when you deal with situation, difficult situation, I can't really tell. I know that my sister, I can tell you one thing, my older sister, I don't think that she could survive. What I had to go through. The plan was my mom was going to send my brother. My brother is about 3 years younger than I am. My mom was about to send my brother after my trip. If everything went okay, if I got to the camp, and she would send him. But I wrote to her and I told her, under any circumstances, no. I've seen death on my journey. I've seen people who was tortured, who were captured. I've seen people who was raped, who was, everything I've seen. So I just didn't want that for my brother. I think he was too young. I was barely, not even 17 at the time. He was only, 13, 14, and I knew that he couldn't handle that. So no, and I told my mom to let him stay.
Do you know what your family's lifestyle was like while they were in Vietnam, while you were going through this journey? Was it easy or difficult?
No, it was very difficult. I think the reason that I left, it was political reason. One of the reasons was that, but the other was financial too, because we were struggling. After 1975, my dad was taken away to the re-education camp. We didn't know where he was for a while, and it was really hard, and my mom was the only one who was working, And they took everything away because the currency changed. When the communists took over the country, they changed the currency. So whatever you had before, it was gone. We didn't have anything. We sold everything we could to survive. With a family of 6 children, my mom couldn't support all of us. So we had to go out and work. I remember, as me and my sister, we did all kind of work. We was working, making cigarettes. We were setting up these kiosks. We were selling books. We were selling coffee, dessert. We selling pineapples. Selling newspapers. We have to do whatever we can at the time to help one another. But even with that, we never had enough to eat. We always struggle putting food on the table, and then also we have to save money and to buy things for my dad. And then the time that we have a chance to go and visit him, we have to gather everything because we knew that he didn't have anything, and his life was hard. So we do that. So one of the reasons for me to leave the country, not just for political reason but financial reason as well. So they were very, very struggling in Vietnam.
What was it like visiting your dad in the re-education camps?
It was hard. It was hard because, going to see him, not knowing when he's going to come back, if he ever going to come back, and condition that he was in at the time, mentally, I think that it took a toll on him. He was questioned, and from what we were told, that they took him in the room, they questioned him, they were hounding on him. The living condition was horrible. They didn't have anything to eat. They had to work in the wood, in the jungle. And one time my dad actually, there's a tree fell on my dad and he broke his back, and he was bedridden for many months. So it was really hard on everybody. And so the visit with him, I mean, we were so grateful that we were able to see him, but at the same time, it was always, heartbroken seeing him there and leaving him there. And the last trip that I went to see my dad, actually I went by myself because my sister was ill at the time. She was, my mom had to stay home to take care of her. So I had to leave. I went with my cousin, who is about 3 years older than I am. So we took this trip, to a city, way far away from Saigon, and took over 2 days to get there, and so many miles to walk because we had to walk through the woods, to get to his camp. It was emotional for me. Like I said, I wasn't, I loved my dad a lot, but we weren't really close. When we were little, we didn't really talk a whole lot. So when seeing him sitting in front of me, and I remember at the time, I did tell him that we were planning to leave, because my mom had planned that for all of us, I believe it was 5 of us at the time, because my little sister was too young at the time. She was planning to stay home and wait for my dad with my little sister, but the rest of us, the older 5, were supposed to be going together and to flee the country by boat, because she had paid somebody, but I think it didn't work out. They took the money, and so, but at the time, I did tell my dad that was the plan, that we would be leaving. And I think he was sad, but he was happy hearing that, that was a plan, because he knew that we could survive. But at the same time, it was upsetting knowing that, maybe that would be the last time I would ever see him. So it was emotional for both of us, for my dad and for myself as well.
How long was your dad in the re-education camp, and when did he finally get released?
He was in the camp for, I believe, for about 7 years before he was released, and he was captured a second time for another couple years. But by the time I was already gone, I already left the country. So I left. I believe that a few short months after I came to America, he was released from the camp, and then for about a couple more years, and he was taken back.
What sort of events followed after you got to Thailand? What did you do from there?
In Thailand, we, after we get to the camp, and we start all the paperwork, to get, to apply to go to another the country, and I didn't have family members. So my mom asked one of my dad's best friend family to sponsor me. And being I was a minor at the time, I was only 17. In order for you to come to America or any country, you have to have family member to sponsor you, like immediate family, and I didn't have any. But I was lucky because I was minor at the time, so I was allowed to apply for that. So the family actually sponsored me to America, and I stayed there. I think the whole. I stayed there for over a year in all of the refugee camp. I was in Cambodia for 7 months, and then I went to Thailand. From Thailand, I went to Indonesia, and then from Indonesia, I went to America.
What were some of the negative things that you saw while on your journey walking, and how did it make you feel, if anything?
I think the hardest part was probably in the refugee camp, not knowing what your future is going to be. The first 7 months I was in the camp in Cambodia, it was hard because it wasn't. We weren't allowed to cross into Thailand. We had to stay in Cambodia, and there was a lot of issues. Because the Cambodian, they during that night they still go to the camp. They raid the camp for women, and I particularly remember there was one lady. She's beautiful. I mean, she's like in early 20s. She's beautiful, and they would come in at night. They would take her away, and they do that every single night. They do that. So I remember at night I have these gentlemen, probably early 20s, 30s, they have to hide me at night. They will be covering me up. They will be lying on top of me because they'll be going to the camp looking for women, and they had their eye on her every single night they came in. They took her away. So it was really hard that way, and we had to endure so many days and many nights like that. And I've seen kids as young as 13. By the time we went to Thailand, I know that a lot of people were taken away to because people got pregnant. I mean, I know one girl, she was only 13 and she was pregnant, and they had no choice, and they had to go and get an abortion. And it was hard on these girls, and it was hard on a lot of people. And broken up a lot of family, wife and fiance, witnessing your wife, your children, your fiance, your sister, having go through this, and there's nothing you can do, So it was hard. It was hard for me, especially seeing kids having to go through and having to deal with that. And I was actually close to one of the girls in the camp. It was a set of siblings. The older one was 16, the younger one was 13. They both got raped, they both got pregnant, and they had to have abortion, and she cried so much the day that she had to go and do it. I believe because she was her religions, and she's Christian, and that's against her religion, but they didn't have a choice. They had to do that, and she was crying so hard that day, and I just felt so bad, felt so lucky for myself that I didn't have to go through that, but then at the same time felt bad for other people that they have to. And life, and it was really hard, we didn't have anything, like it was in the wood at the time. It was not actually camp. When they took us there, that we actually have to build a camp from scratch, we starting. So there was no water. They give us a gallon of water per person per day. So you can't really take no shower. We have to save the water for like 3, 4, 5 days before we actually have enough to shower. And it's not really a shower, which is like more like cleaning yourself. And we had nothing but just rice. And we talk about rice that I think they use it to feed animals more than just not like a regular rice that you have over here. It's like a brown rice type, but it's a really big, and it's like it takes you about like 3-4 hours to cook them, and that's all we had. We had the rice, we mixed them with sea salt and with oil, and that's all we have for almost like 7 months, eating that and nothing else. And there's, like the water they gave to us, both for hygiene, for shower, but at the same time for drinking as well. So life was really hard for all of us in that camp. By the time I get to Thailand, it was a lot better because it was actually camp has already been built, everything was been set up. So, food, we did have food. Not a whole lot, but it was a lot more than we could. And then people who have family members that can send them money, they can buy stuff. They can go to grocery shopping and buy things. So I didn't have family member, sending me money, but life was still much better. Compared with the other camp. So that was the hardest part for me. And I think as like being as young, I was at the time 17, always wishing, having more, seeing it's hard to seeing other people, having money and buying stuff, buying clothes, buying food, and I didn't have that. It was a little hard for me at the time too.
How did you make a shelter for yourself when you were in Cambodia?
Well, it's like it's everybody together. In Cambodia, we built up we set up these tents, and then we all sleep, maybe like 12, 15 people sharing the same tent, and just like everybody else, everybody's the same at the time, everybody sleep the same way, eat the same thing. It wasn't so much different for anybody else. I think it was really hard for us because we didn't know at the time what was going to happen for us, whether we weren't allowed to go into Thailand or not, to go to an actual camp, because only when you go to a refugee camp that you can apply to go to America or any other country. But being stuck in Cambodia, we don't know what's going to happen, when they're going to return back to Vietnam or just stay there in that camp and not going anywhere. So that was the hard part for me too, and for everybody.
When you were in Thailand, what was your lifestyle like there?
Thailand, I wasn't there for that long, only for a few months, and like I said, it was already a set-up camp, already established. So things was much better. You have a little bit more freedom. There was no fighting, because when we were in the camp in Cambodia, because there was a lot of fighting. There was several group of Cambodian army. They different army fighting one another. So I remember there was nights that they would be shoot out. We have to run. Everybody have to run away from the camp, and that's another thing that we have to worry about. Whether you want to be alive the next day or not. And it happened. Randomly, any night that could happen. So by the time we get to Thailand, it was much better. Life was much better at the time. It's still a refugee, but safety. The one thing that we know that we were safe there. Another thing that knowing that now that you can go somewhere, now that you're not stuck in the man, we weren't afraid to be returned back to Vietnam. So it was. The feeling was much better. I think it was more hopeful for everybody, and certainly for me.
From the people that you originally started your journey with, from that group, how many of them ended up making it and how many of them didn't? Or do you know what happened to the people that didn't make it?
I know that 2 of them were captured and sent back. I don't know what happened to one of them. We never knew what happened to that person. And during the journey, a lot of people die from, walking on grenade. That they have a lot of grenade that was underground, and you walk on there, and you get killed, and a lot of animals. And I remember one guy I was in when I got to the camp that I was rescued from. He was only 19 years old. He left with his best friend, and during the journey, he was bitten by a snake. So by the time he got to the camp, his body was, his leg and everything was swollen up, and he knew he was going to die. And it was really hard because he has a sister who's married, and she lives in Thailand, and his plan was going to go to the camp and either go to stay with her or try to get to America. He never got a chance. I remember I went to visit him. He was crying so hard. He said he didn't want to die. He didn't. He was too young, and he knew he was going to die, but he was afraid to die, and it was the hardest thing I have ever having to face, because he wasn't much older than I was at the time. I was 17. He was 19, and he didn't have no family, and he died. And there was no one around, which is me, 2 more people, and his best friend. So we were the only 4 who actually took his body and buried him. We didn't have anything. It was, it's in the wood, and it was a lot of gravel and everything. And we dig a hole, and it was barely enough just to put his body in. And we didn't have anything. We used our hand. We used our a tree stick to do that, and it took us several hours to do that. And we buried him. But the sad thing is, I don't think a lot of people was even care at the time. I think life was so hard for everybody. Everybody had to go through so many things. It was just like a normal thing for people, and it's kind of sad seeing that someone who was that young and having to die without family, and die a painful death. It's just really, really hard on me and on his best friend. I remember him crying so hard. And I could never forget his face. I could never forget his face. The fear that he knew he was going to die, and the thing that he said to his best friend about his family, what he wanted his best friend to tell his parents, So it was hard. It was hard on everybody, and I think that was the hardest part for me. On top of everything, I think having to see that. To this day, I still remember. I still remember him. I still remember his face. I still remember his death. And I don't know what happened to his grave. After I left, I don't know.
Were there any other particular things that really stuck out to you while you were in Cambodia or Thailand, of people that either suffered or things that you saw that were really beneficial to the people there?
I don't know. I think it was the uncertainty of what's going to happen, and sometimes I've seen people cheated on other people, and try to take advantage of other people, and it's kind of sad. I think people are having to face with a situation that you have nothing left, that you have to survive, and in order to survive, sometimes you have to step on other people, and I think I see that a lot in refugee camp. At the same time, I also see the humanity in other people. How people, some get together, some will protect other. Like I said, I was being protected by a couple of these guys during this night, and I was protected by that lady, the Cambodian lady, that she was helping me. So both way, I see the bad thing and I see the good things in people, and at the same time I understand why people behave the way that they did, and I'm pretty sure that I did a lot of other things as well. But I think I understand people more. I have more tolerance for people behaviors. A lot of time my kids always tell me that you are just such a pushover, you let people take advantage of you, or you don't care. But I think it's having been through so much, I understand why people behave certain way, and it's easier for me to accept them. Yeah, not so being so critical anymore.
Do you think that maybe some of these people started acting in a negative way or unmoralistically because of the situation and the desperation, or do you think that it has to do more with the person's morals and ethics to begin with?
I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the moral and ethic as well, but I think it mostly has something to do with the situation, the desperation of the situation. It's a survival instinct. You do whatever you have to do to survive. You cheat on other people just for a cup of rice, or fighting, over a gallon of water. It's just little thing, but I think it's both.
What other sort of camps, if any, did you go to after Thailand?
From Thailand, I was taken to Singapore, but it was more like a transition camp. I only there for a couple of days, and I went from there. I went to Galan, Indonesia. So that's like another camp, and it was very well established camp over there. I met a lot of people. I met a lot of friends. Things were a lot easier over there. There was a lot more freedom. We were able to work. I actually worked when I was in the camp. I worked for a coffee shop, and earn money. So with the money, I could buy stuff. So things was a lot easier. And that was a final camp. I knew that that was a waiting camp for me to come to America. So my mentally, I was at ease, because I know that my the journey is about to end. I'm finally going to be at a place that I wanted to be. That's America.
Were you able to keep in contact with any of your family members or know how they were doing as you were going through your journey? Yeah,
we were allowed to write letters. It took a long time for them to receive, like a couple months, but I was able to write them, and I was able to find out what happened to them and how their lives were, and so it was a really big comfort for me, having that contact, knowing that my family are okay, they're doing well, and for my family as well, especially for my mom. I'm pretty sure it wasn't easy for her, having to let me go, the first time ever in my life, and in her life, of course, So I knew it was hard on her the day that I left, and so I'm glad that I was able to stay in touch with my family during that time.
Were you also able to keep in contact with some friends that you had from schooling, or no?
No, not the school. Like I said, it was ability to write letter, and things like that. They're just very limited, and so just family member that we were able to stay in touch, but not friends or anything like that.
After Indonesia, where did you go?
I went to America. I was sponsored by a friend of the family. My dad's best friend family, they sponsored me to Holland, Michigan. So I was there for like a year and a half before I left. No, actually for 3 years, I'm sorry. I was there for 3 years before I left, and I went to another state. I got married really, really early.
Once you got to America, what were your first impressions of America or Americans, and did it align with whatever you thought America was like before you came?
Not at all, because to me before talking about America, you see, you think of them as like a huge big city. Everything's beautiful, everything is modern, everything is top of the line. I went to Holland, Michigan. It's really, really a small town. It's really rural, and I got there. It was in winter time. It was snow. It was cold. It was just. I was really, really. I don't know how do I explain that. Not disappointed, but I was shocked. I said, "This is not what I have imagined." No, it was not. But at the same time, I was quite glad that because I have, I was sponsored by family and have children that was same age as as I am, and also that I've already knew the family before, so it was like a total stranger that I had to stay with. So that was a big comfort for me. And it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here.
When you first came to America, how old were you?
I came here, I turned 18 2 months after I came.
Did you find it difficult or rather easy to integrate into the American lifestyle, or did you have a bit of a culture shock?
Not a culture shock. I think I was too young at the time. I mean, it's kind of funny saying that 18 was too young, but I think from the time when 1975 until I came, from 13 to 18, I struggled, earning a living, working, doing any kind of thing. So it was not so much of anything. It was just about surviving, And by the time I got here, it wasn't so much as culture shock because I was, I stayed with a Vietnamese family, they have same culture, eat the same type of food, expose the same thing. The language barrier was the biggest problem for me. I didn't speak any English when I came, so it took me a long time having to learn. And then after I left, I only stayed with them for a year and a half. So I was on my own for another year and a half after I left. So it was a little difficult for me having to adapt to the new culture. But after I left, I went to college. So I stayed on campus. So being exposed to all American, because like I said, the whole school there was only 2 Vietnamese at the time, and my roommate was American, and we couldn't communicate at the time because I didn't speak any English, but somehow we get along. Somehow things was okay for me. I didn't have a lot of problem. No, adapting to a new culture. No.
How long were you there in Michigan, and when did you leave, and where did you leave to?
I was in Michigan for 3 years. I stayed with my my sponsor family for a year and a half, and then I went to college for a year and a half. But I couldn't stay there. First of all, because of the weather, it was too cold. I didn't have anything. I didn't have no family, no transportation, and I had to work because it was the school that I attended was a private school. It was really expensive. I didn't have a whole lot of help. I had to take out loans, and it was too much for me. And also, it was really hard because I knew that I had to help my family too, and I wasn't able to do that at the time because I was, working minimum wage. I remember I was cleaning the bathroom in the dorm at the time, And it was another thing. It was embarrassing for me, it's going to school with the same people that I have to go and cleaning their room, cleaning their bathroom and things like that. So it was really, really hard for me. And then on top of it, the money, I just didn't feel like I could afford to take out loans and continue to take out loans. And the money I was making, it wasn't enough. And I was working like 27 hours a week and going to school full time. It was really hard for me as well, and not speaking the language. I wasn't doing really well in school. I think I barely making it like my GPA probably like 2 point something at the time, barely, and I knew that I couldn't go on that way. So I decided to get married. My ex-husband was someone I knew from a refugee camp. We stayed in touch as a friend, and then he asked me to move up to his state. It was in Washington State, so I agreed. And so it was like a marriage of convenience at the time. So I went there and I got married, yeah. And from there I only stayed for like 6 months, and then we moved out to Houston, and I've been here since.
Are you still with the same person that you married in Washington?
No, I've been divorced. I was married to him for 18 years, and I've been divorced for 10 years now.
I see. What made you want to move down to Houston from Washington?
Well, because we had a lot of friends that we met in refugee camp, and most of them came to Houston. So we decided, and then it was only me and my husband at the time, and the weather, it wasn't as cold as Michigan, but it was cold still, and it was wet because it was raining all the time. It was very depressing, and it was a time of my life I couldn't deal with that. So I told my husband, "Oh, we need to move down here," and he agreed, and so we both moved down here, and because of friends.
Was it difficult to restart your life in Houston?
No, because like we barely start at the time. Like I said, I was only like a year and a half in school. So when we both moved out here, we start working. We looked for job, and we start working so we can help our family, because both our family are back in Vietnam. He came here by himself as well, same as I was, and so we work full time ever since, and we went to school part time. And supporting us and supporting our family. Yeah.
What kind of jobs did you hold after the very low minimum wage kind of jobs that you had at the University of Michigan?
Oh, I did all kind of things. I worked at a restaurant as a waitress. I worked as a seamstress at a shop. I worked as a seamstress at a JCPenney company making curtains, and then I worked for doctor's office. At one point, I was working in the same company with my ex-husband for a few years. It was a plastic bottle company making water bottle and things like that. So I did all kind of work, during the time, putting myself through college, both me and my husband. Yes.
Did you end up having any children?
Yes. I had a few miscarriage before I had my first child, but I had my first child when I was 26. I got married when I was 20, and my first child when I was 26. And right now I have 2 children.
How old are each of your children?
Well, my oldest one is almost 22, and my second one, she's 14.
How do you think your life experiences have affected your children, if any? I haven't said much to my children about my life. I mean, they knew that I came here as a refugee. They knew that I was in refugee camp. They knew that their grandfather was in re-education camp. They knew that we had to struggle. But I think it's just a basic information. But being born here, I never have to experience. I don't think they can grasp the concept. I don't think that they can. It doesn't register to them the way that I would think. That I think that it would to someone else who has to go through or experience the same thing. No, but I don't share with them that much, though. No. Are you also particularly maybe protecting themselves from the harms and dangers of the world because of what you went through, because they're just too atrocious?
Yeah, I think maybe subconsciously I'm doing that. I'm not sure. I don't tell them a whole lot of things about my life because I just don't see I don't know, it would help them. I don't see that. I wanted to protect them. I'm very protective of my children. And it could have been from my experience as being on my own for so long, having to struggle a lot, having to go through a lot. I want to shield them from everything as possible. I just don't want having them to not just experience, but having to know or having to hear things, unpleasant things. I just don't think that would help them. To me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see it that way. So I kind of shield them from a lot of things. Yeah.
Have your children ever communicated with the other family members of yours, such as your siblings or your parents?
No. I think one of the thing is my children, they don't speak Vietnamese very well. They understand somewhat, but they don't speak Vietnamese very well. And with my family, my mom and my dad, they're very traditional. They speak Vietnamese, and all my sister, my brother, and with me, even when I speak with my sister and my brother, I speak only Vietnamese. I don't speak English. I only speak English with my children sometimes. And so I think the barrier of the language barrier is a part of it, and then also I think the personality too. I think my kids, they because I raised them, when I divorced my husband 10 years ago, my older one was only 12 and my little one was only 4 at the time. I'm very independent because I've been on my own and I have to do everything myself. So I'm very independent. I don't like to share a whole lot, and my kids are the same way. They very independent and not very emotional, the same way as I am, and I think that was a part of it as well. That they don't share a whole lot. I can see that I'm not as close to my sibling as the others. All of my 5 siblings, we are very close, and I'm very close to my family. But my relationship with my siblings are not the same as their relationship with one another, and so the same way with my children. I think that's a part of it as well.
When did you first get reunited with your family, and what was that like?
They all came here in 1992. I sponsored all of my family. It was a big family, but at the time, a couple of my sisters were already married. They have children. Actually, they came here not just because of me, because my dad also, because he was in re-education camp, so he came here under the program they call the Humanity Operation, is HO program, that was they call. And my sister, because being over the age of 21 and been married, so they weren't supposed to be going with my dad, but because I sponsored them, so everybody was able to come at the same time. And it was very emotional for everybody in the family. I'm the type, I don't show a lot of emotion. I mean, I was really, really glad to see them, and it was a long way. I think it took them for about I left in 1980, and I didn't see them until 1992, so 12 years, a separation of 12 years. And then, and it's a little awkward at first because when I left, I was only 16, not even 17 yet. So I was like a teenager, and now when they're here, I'm like a full-grown woman. So there was a big adjustment for me, especially for my little sister, my youngest sister, because when I left, she was only 6, so she was like a little kid, and now she's 19. So like a total different person that I have to kind of get used to. So yeah, it was a happy time, but also it was a little awkward for me, honestly, to say.
Where are your parents, and where are the rest of your siblings now?
Oh, they are all here. We all in Houston. We all live in Houston, and we live only like a few minutes away from one another. We, we want to stay as one family, so we get together on every Friday. The whole family get together on every Friday to have family dinner. We go out, a lot. We spend a lot of time together, vacation, and we're planning a big vacation this year. That will be her whole family going to New York.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Was it difficult for your parents or your siblings to adjust coming to America?
I think at first it was. I think a big culture shock, especially for my parents, because being much older when they came. So it's and they complained a lot in the beginning that how Americanized I was. The way my thinking. The way I talk to my children, the way that I handle my children. I think it was like it's different from them. So it was that they were having a little hard time adjusting to the new culture, to the new environment. But eventually, yeah, I think it took them about maybe a year or two. I remember in the beginning they kept talking about wanting to go back to Vietnam, wishing they were in Vietnam, and I said no. I said, honestly, I mean, I've been here for so long, much longer than I have ever, been in Vietnam. So I don't miss Vietnam the way that they do. And when I told them that, they weren't happy, especially my mom. She wasn't really happy about that. she just, she felt like I have forgotten where I came from. I don't. It's just that, it's just, I'm more comfortable over here now. It doesn't mean that I don't know where I'm from. I don't think of. I mean, I think about Vietnam a lot. Still think about my childhood, the memory and the good time, the bad times, and but I'm happy here, and my children are here. My life's here now, and I'm comfortable.
What was the process for sponsoring and getting your family to come to the United States? Was it just a legal aspect, or was there money involved as well?
The legal, mostly the legal aspect. But yeah, we have to pay, just for the paperwork that you have to pay, but it's not a whole lot. It's just the airfare we had to put up with that first before, we had to pay for everybody, and we had 13 people at the time, so it was, quite a lot of money for us, for me and my ex-husband at the time. We work, and then we didn't make a whole lot of money. We're still in school, and so it was hard, but it wasn't, and my family helped it out. When they came here, they were helping us out with the ticket as well. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself more Vietnamese or American or both?
No, I still consider myself as a Vietnamese. Totally, I speak Vietnamese more fluently. And there's a lot of, I still believe in a lot of Vietnamese cultures. I'm pretty much, my thinking is still the same way. I mean, as much Americanized as I am right now. There's certain things that I like. The American culture I would like to adopt, and my children, because they are American, they speak the language. They was born here, was raised here. They knew nothing but American culture, and I try to instill some of the Vietnamese culture, and some of them, they do, like they see that the importance of family relationship. They understand that, and but some other things, they don't agree, like when they speak their mind, they don't think that when adults say something, that's the way it goes, doesn't matter, and they are your parents, you have to listen no matter what. They don't feel like that. It's like, okay, adult can be wrong, and they try to discuss that with you. With my mom, she thinks that it's being disrespectful. With them, they just think like, it's just, a culture is like that. Children should be able to discuss with parents, should be able to express their feeling, their concern, their opinion, and so that was a little conflict. Yeah, but my children, I think they understand both. I mean, they are American, but at the same time, not totally American to the point that they don't know where they are from. They know that I am Vietnamese, not American.
What sort of values and beliefs and customs of Vietnamese culture would you like to preserve, and which ones of American culture would you like to adapt? For our culture, the way that how the respect in the family, for the elders. The family relationship, I like the way that how we are very close to one another.
we respect one another, and we will always be there for one another. I think that's the culture. That is something that I would like them to have. And as an Asian culture, a Vietnamese culture, we work really hard. Education is the most important thing, and that's something that I want my children to have, and they do understand that. As far as American, I think I like the American culture in a way that they are able to express themselves freely, because there are more opportunities. They they are exposed to more things, and I like that about them. I like them to be able to come to me and talk to me and share with me about almost everything, and things that I don't think that I would be able to do that with my parents. When I was little, living in Vietnam, you listen to your parents, everything they say. Your parents is everything, and sometimes I disagree. But the thing is, that you can't say anything because they're your parents. But my children, they can do that, and so that's something that I really appreciate. That I really appreciate the honesty, and also the confidence my children have, and I don't think that we have as as kids when we were in Vietnam. So I like that about American culture. There's a bad thing, there are good thing on both sides, and I want them to be able to have both and not just one.
What kind of an occupation do you have now, and what was it that made you want to go in this direction?
Well, I work as child care licensing inspector. My job is to monitor the agency or the homes that take care of abused children. Children have been removed from their home by CPS, or they place these children in either foster home or facilities, or they call it treatment centers. A lot of kids they do because they abuse they were abused too much that they need the help emotionally, mentally, physically. They are damaged, so they have to have treatment services. So this type of facility that I monitor, and it wasn't my choice. It's just something that I was working for another department, and there was a layoff, and we were told that we have to go. So I applied, and I got this job, and I love it. Oh gosh, working with children, especially abused children, that's one thing that I have to say that it's most rewarding thing that I have ever done. Because I know I can make a little difference. You monitor these facilities, there's something that you have to make sure they are taking care of the kids, and not always the case. And our presence makes a difference. So I come in, I talk to these kids, reading their records, hearing of things that happen in their life, and you feel so lucky as a person, as a parent, feeling every time when I go home, when I see interview kids at a psychiatric hospital, just try to kill himself, herself, reading her record or his record, having been raped or abused by family member over and over again. It's heartbroken, and these are kids. They are kids like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, and some kids you see that they're so damaged to the point that that no amount of medication, no amount of therapy could help them, and you feel so bad for them. And I think that may be one another thing that I'm so protective of my children as well, because I know these things happen to everybody, to people in this country, one of the greatest country in the world. Everybody, streaming to come here, to the land of opportunities and everything, but yet at the same time, bad thing happen. So I am glad that I'm doing what I'm doing right now. Is one of the best job that I ever had in my life, and I intend to stay here for a long time.
That's good to hear. How do you feel that your life experiences through your journey of leaving Vietnam have translated into who you are today?
Like I said before, having been through so much, I think I have more tolerance for other people. I see the good and the bad in people. At the same time, I understand, and I don't like to be so critical. I know I can be sometimes, so it's human nature. I know I can be sometimes, but I try not to be, and that's one thing that I try to teach my children: be more tolerate of other people. Sometimes I see my children get upset over a little thing. Oh, my roommate, she's this and she's that, and I try to get her to understand. There's so much more thing that you could be worried about instead of having to worry about my roommate turn off the light on me and things like that. So in a way it makes me more I don't know, it's easy or it's more easygoing, or it's just, and at the same time I have less tolerance for other people when it comes to the little thing that they have to struggle over little thing. I don't have that kind of patience. So it kind of both way. When I see people crying over little thing, and I just don't have patience for that. I just, like, come on, get over it. And somehow I could be seen as cold as a person as well.
Do you think that your life experiences have translated in any way to the way you work professionally or to your work ethics?
To my work ethics, yes. And because I've been through not a lot, compared with other people, God, no, that is nearly comparable to them. But at the same time, because I have been through some of the things, I understand a little more. I have more sympathy for people, especially for kids. The kids that I'm dealing on a daily basis now. I have so much sympathy for them, so much. And I feel, a lot of time, honestly, sometimes I leave the facility, I cry. It's just, even just reading the records, and I just hope that my children, I try to shield them as much as possible. At the same time, I want them to have more patience, have more love and care for other people, and that's something I want to teach my children.
As far as your friends from back in the past in Vietnam or any other family members, are there anyone else in Vietnam that you have a connection to that you still communicate with?
Yeah, I have two best friends in Vietnam that I knew before I left. And for a while, I didn't have any contact with them because, the thing that I was in refugee camp, and when I came here, life was hectic. I was, still trying to build my life over here. So there was no contact for a while. But since my family came, and because they're fan of the family too, so I've reconnected with them, and actually I went back to Vietnam about 5 years ago, and we spent a lot of time, and it seemed like it was like yesterday. Yeah, the connection's still there. We had a lot of catching up to do, but it didn't seem like that was a lifetime ago. It would seem like just yesterday that we just talked to one another.
From talking to them, did they share with you any hardships that they went through, or what was their lifestyle like in Vietnam while you were journeying through to America?
No, we didn't talk much about that. It was mostly catching up on things that are going on in our life right now. How you're doing, what you're doing, and things like that. But we don't talk much about the past. No. And we talk about what we were sharing prior to my journey. Yeah, the thing that what we did when we were little, what did we do, and to kind of go back to the memory lane. So yeah, we talk about that, but not so much about what happened to our lives since we got separate. No.
As far as the younger generations, such as college age or high school age Vietnamese Americans in the United States, is there anything specific that you would like to see more of from them?
I would like them to not to take things for granted. I think a lot of time kids over here take things for granted because they never have to struggle And so that's something that I would like to see from the young generation, and be appreciative of things that the things that they have, and especially understand the freedom that they have here. There's a cost of that, from family members, even generation before that. We have to go through a lot. We have to sacrifice a lot to be here, and to what they have now is from all of those sacrifices. So that's what I want the younger generation to be able to remember, to understand that, and somehow because no matter what, they are still Vietnamese. When you look at them, you can't tell they are American, no matter how well they speak the language or anything else. They are still Vietnamese, and I want them to be able to contribute to our community or the culture, and to preserve our culture. So that's something that I would like to see from my daughter, especially my older one. And now she's at the age, I think, that she can understand that, and she's able to do that. So I want her to participate in Vietnamese community. Want to go. She's attending college right now, and I want her to participate in those Vietnamese group at school, doing volunteer work, and those are things that I would like to see more of my daughter.
Is there anything else that we have not talked about so far that additionally you would like to comment to the audience on?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and this video will only be used for educational purposes.
Thank you for having me.